Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Corrine Alfeld. I'm a program officer in the National Center for Education Research at IES. Welcome to the third day of the IES-PI meeting. And thank you for joining us for this session on one of our Pandemic Learning Recovery Research Network's presentations. We have three Pandemic Learning Recovery Networks that were funded with American Rescue Plan funds last year. This network, we have named it the Restart Network. In a minute, you will see a slide to introduce the session. It is about, let's see, oops, that's not the right slide. Oh, that's just the California slide. Sorry, I thought there was a slide for the whole session. Never mind. Anyway, welcome to the session. We're going to have presentations from each of the 5 projects that are part of the network. These projects are coordinated by a network lead, which is led by AIR. They will not be presenting today, but you will probably see them in the future. And they do have a website that you can go to read more about the network. I will put it in the chat in just a minute. But first, as we get started, before we hear from each of the teams, I would like to take a poll. So maybe that is a good time to start with the poll to see what everyone thinks about how long you think it will take students to recover from the pandemic. You can use your phone to scan that QR code there and then take the poll. And while we're waiting, I should just say our other, we have another network for community college student recovery, but this one is PreK-12 learning recovery. Good, see some numbers coming in now. Great to see the live poll. All right. Well, I'm not sure if people have been able to get into the poll, but it looks like somewhere between 2 to 5 years, and it seems to be the popular choice here, maybe 4 to 5 years that will take students to recover from the pandemic. Of course, that's way too long. We want them to recover sooner, and these projects are all meant to do research on different parts of the learning recovery in order to speed that up. So hopefully we will be able to make a dent in the field and help students to recover. So thanks for participating in the poll. And I think we will then turn it over to our first project. We are going to hear from the 5 projects in 5 different parts of the country. After each one, we're going to take 1 or 2 minutes for some burning questions that you might have. But we're going to leave the discussion for later in the session. So we'll have the presentations, each with a minute or 2 for any burning questions, some panel discussion, and then a Q&A session. So let's get started with California.
Great. Good morning. My name is Nu Gao. I am with the Public Policy Institute of California. In the next few minutes, my colleague Jonathan Eisler will be sharing some of the early work from our research practice partnership to improve pandemic recovery in California. And we're here representing our team of more than 20 researchers and also policymakers from PPIC, CDE, UC Berkeley, and UC San Diego. Let's start with the need for this partnership. In 2021, California established the $4.6 billion Expanding Learning Opportunity Grant, or ELOG, to help students recover from the pandemic. ELOG gives extra money to low-income students, English learners, and also foster youth students. And the goal is to prioritize students who were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. About 45% of the ELOG money comes from the federal grant, federal government, namely ARPA funds. Because of this, districts have until September 2024 to spend those dollars. The California Department of Education, or CDE, released some very generic guidelines. So for example, ELOG dollars can be spent on 7 very broad categories, including extending instructional learning time, providing credit recovery supports, providing SEL supports, etc. And California is a local control state, which means that ultimately it's up to the districts to decide what kind of learning recovery programs they will develop and implement. And because of the local control nature, CDE does not have timely or crucial information about how those ELOG dollars have been spent, what types of recovery programs have been implemented, and also whether or not those investments are moving the needle in terms of helping students recover. To fill the gap, we formed a research practice partnership with CDE, UC Berkeley, and UC San Diego. In this partnership, we're interested in pursuing 3 goals, with each goal corresponding to 1 research question. So the first one, we're interested in identifying the learning recovery programs districts have implemented. And in the second goal, we're interested in exploring the institutional factors that may shape districts' decision-making. And in the last goal, we're interested in exploring or examining the relationship between recovery programs and student outcomes. In order to answer those research questions, we developed a mixed methods approach. And for example, in order to look at the recovery programs, we'll be relying on documentary analysis of existing ELOG plans. Because the ELOG plans do not really include much information about student subgroups, we'll also be launching a statewide survey of school districts to collect those information. And in order to understand the institutional factors, we will be conducting longitudinal case studies of up to 10 districts. And last, in order to understand the association between recovery programs and student outcomes, we will be using an event study design, and we'll be running regressions for overall students and also for students groups, including low-income students, English learners, Black Latino students, as well as students with disabilities. Now let me turn over to my state partner, Jonathan Eisler, who will be sharing some preliminary findings and also discussing next steps.
Thank you, New, and good morning, everyone. So as New mentioned, one of the first goals we have for this project is to scope out what districts in California are actually doing with the ELOG funding. So as you can see here, we did an analysis of what actual percentage of districts were doing the 7 different strategies. So as you can see from the top of the chart, the vast majority, almost 100%, 92%, were using funds to accelerate progress through learning supports. Nearly as many, 86%, using integrated student supports, a vast majority also extending instructional time, support for credit deficient students, and so on and so forth. And then as you can see, only about half of the districts out of the 1,000+ districts in the state focus their funding on community learning hubs, with additional, slightly more than that, 70% looking at additional academic services, and then 76% for training of school staff. But if you look at the next slide, where do the actual dollars go? This is kind of an interesting analysis here. So even though half of the districts were putting funds towards community learning hubs, that wasn't actually the lowest amount of dollars, the actual dollars themselves. 6% of the actual dollars went to that. 4% went to support for credit deficient students. But as you can see, that top category, again, almost 1/3 of the dollars overall go towards accelerating progress through learning supports. And then even though extending instructional learning time was about 4th or 5th in terms of the list, 1/4 of the dollars went to that. So as you can see from these 2 tables, there's a wide variety of strategies, and obviously districts can employ multiple strategies, but the actual dollars themselves, over half of the dollars went to accelerating progress through learning supports and then extending instructional learning time. So we'll continue to track this over time. In terms of looking forward, New talked about the 3 different goals. Obviously, we're focusing primarily on the first goal, but starting to ramp up in goals 2 and 3. We are really going to broaden the scope. So since the original funding became available from the federal government, the state itself has passed several major recovery programs. So a lot of the districts, of course, are braiding the funding together. We are launching a survey very soon now. We just finalized the survey. We're going to disseminate the link to the districts very soon, if not in the next day or so, which is great news. We did draw on existing national surveys so that we could actually do some comparability between some of these other existing surveys. Our longitudinal data system in California, which is CalPads, we're sharing data with colleagues at UC San Diego that are going to be doing some statistical analyses, looking at estimating pandemic learning gaps using CalPads. And then we've done some case studies, but we're in the process of recruiting a handful more, which is very exciting, trying to get a pretty wide range of experiences in terms of urban versus rural versus suburban. And then the other pieces in place, of course, we're going to disseminate our findings. So we've already started writing up some of the results, either through published reports, through briefs, through blogs, et cetera. And then we've also actually gathered together a workshop for a group of education partners in the state that we're convening to put together different strategies. And again, that's something that's composed of policymakers, practitioners, and other interests. So that's really kind of a very multi-method, multidisciplinary strategy. And yeah, I know we just have limited time here. So any additional questions?
Thank you. We do have one question that came in through the Q&A from Fiona Hollins. Jonathan, curious to see only 6% of the ELOG funds are spent on training for school staff. Any explanation for this?
I don't have an explanation offhand. I know that kind of qualitatively, we're in the process of digging into, why leadership at the LEA level, at the district level, how they're basically, allocating those funds. So I don't have an answer now, but we are kind of qualitatively trying to dig into why these funds went the way that they, why they were allocated in the way that they were. And hopefully we'll have more information on that in the future.
Any other burning questions before we get to the next project? Okay, let's go to the Chicago team.
Thanks, Green. Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Fleming, Director of Literacy for Chicago Public Schools. Great to be here with you, and excited to share a quick overview of our efforts in Chicago to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on K-2 students' early literacy learning through a curriculum-based approach. Similar to the national trends that I know a lot of us are seeing, Chicago's youngest learners were most significantly impacted by the pandemic. We all know that remote learning was especially hard for our littlest ones. And so given just how critical the early years are for long-term academic outcomes, we've invested a lot, both during and since the pandemic, in ensuring that all of our students, and especially our youngest learners, have access to effective and rigorous literacy instruction. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Thanks, Neil. We also all know from reports like TNTP's Opportunity Myth that the key to learning acceleration and closing achievement gaps is consistent access to grade level content and multiple consecutive years of effective instruction. Additional evidence comes from reports like the Carnegie Elements report that curriculum-based approaches, and in Chicago, we would argue culturally relevant curriculum-based approaches are a key to learning acceleration. So it's that consistent year-over-year access to standards-aligned, rigorous, and authentic learning opportunities that's going to make a difference for students. And we're not going to get there, we think, by cobbling together resources from Teachers Pay Teachers. We need a systems-level solution. So in Chicago, we've made a big bet on investing in high-quality curriculum and curriculum-based professional learning. We engaged curriculum development partners at Public Consulting Group, PCG, which many of you may know, and we paired up with Ed Reports to develop evaluation rubrics to guide our curriculum development process. The English Language Arts rubrics draw on familiar Ed Reports criteria related to quality, the complexity of materials, knowledge building, foundational skills, usability, et cetera, that you're probably familiar with. We also developed a CPF-specific equity rubric. This is more focused on ensuring that all students are challenged with rigorous grade level content That curriculum was developed in line with universal design for learning principles, that it included embedded supports for diverse learners and English learners. About 51% of our students in CPS have a home or heritage language other than English. And we wanted materials that incorporate contemporary text and other media that really reflect and value the cultural, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of our district. So our goal here was really to incorporate the best of what we know from the science of oral language, reading, and writing development with the best of what we know about the impact of culturally responsive instruction on literacy learning. So we developed those rubrics to capture that, and we built a curriculum with our partners. The result on the next slide is a contemporary, comprehensive K-12 curriculum. We're focused for this study on K2, but each Skyline course contains everything that a teacher needs: scopes and sequences, unit plans, lesson level teacher facilitation guides, student-facing materials, a whole assessment system, all in a digital format and accessed through a centralized technical ecosystem. Just to be clear, while teachers access the curriculum digitally, this is not designed for students to be on the computer all day. This is especially true for the primary grades. So all adopting schools receive classroom sets of all the core texts, as well as additional non-digital materials like manipulatives, whiteboards, decodable readers, and other resources to support literacy learning. To get teachers trained up, on the next slide, we have built a series of self-paced modules to get teachers trained in the technical ecosystem. We do digital micro credentials called Skyline badges to get familiar with the sort of technical components. And then on the next slide, we've also built a comprehensive professional learning system to complement the rollout of the curriculum. This includes things like bridging to Skyline sessions offered over the spring and summer for school teams to get an idea of the instructional shifts. Then we host lots of opportunities to participate in kickoff sessions, get teachers geared up for Unit 1. Throughout the year, we have a series of grade level specific professional learning sessions that get teachers prepared for every unit that are grade specific K1, 2. And then we built out a sequence of team meeting protocols to support teachers with ongoing planning and implementation in between unit launch PDs. This last slide here is just to give you a sense of the scale. Skyline adoption has steadily increased over the past couple of years of implementation. We started with about 100 schools. This past year, about 140 schools, 930 K2 teachers participated in. This year, we anticipate about 2/3 of district schools. That's about 1,500 K2 teachers serving more than 35,000 students. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Elaine Allensworth to describe more of the details of the research study. Elaine? You might be muted, Elaine. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jane. So we're doing a mixed method study of implementation of the Skyline ELA curriculum and professional learning in grades K through 2. Our focus is on 4 priority groups: Black and Latino students who live in census block groups with the lowest median incomes and the most families living under the poverty line, as well as English learners and students who begin kindergarten with the fewest literacy skills. Next slide. We'll be looking, oops, it's not coming through. Can you see the slide? Oh, there it comes. So we'll be looking at how schools and teachers adopt the resources and the professional learning that's being provided by the district. So the Skyline resources and professional learning are represented on the left of this figure. And what we're really going to be paying attention to is, how schools are adopting. We have data on usage from the online platform, and we also have administrative records about participation in professional learning. And then we have teacher reports from our surveys. The district gives surveys every year. 70 to 80% of teachers participate, and so we can look at differences across schools and over time. But we also are using that information to understand what's happening in schools around the use of Skyline. And then we have these intermediary outcomes, which are represented by the light gray boxes in the figure, looking at how teachers in Skyline adopting schools perceive things like the resources that are available to them, their curricular resources, professional learning, And we also have reports of their perceptions of student engagement in their classes. And we can compare the same schools over time, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, in terms of what teachers are saying about how their students are engaged in their classes. Then our ultimate outcomes are in the dark gray boxes, students' literacy outcomes, and that includes their scores and assessments and also their grades on literacy standards. Next slide. I think we're out of time, but I'll just say we're doing a lot of different work to really understand what's happened to students in terms of literacy skills and to really classify schools in terms of their use of Skyline resources. One thing that this study definitely benefited from was some work we did before the grant even started, that we got funding from local funders to do a scan and just interview people across the district about their hopes and dreams and concerns about Skyline. And that really helped us have the understanding, which has been just invaluable in doing the study. I'll stop now.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions for the Chicago team? Remember, we're going to have a Q&A longer session later, but just clarifying questions before we get to the next project. I don't see anyone, so let's go forward with the Illinois team.
Thanks very much, Corrine, and good morning to everyone. I think it's still morning. My name is Kimberly Kenzora from the American Institutes for Research. I'm happy to be working on a team. I want to acknowledge my colleagues. Jenny Zhang is here today, also from AIR, and our colleague Christina Lacalci, who's a co-PI, is not with us. We are partnering with the Illinois State Board of Education in this work. They're not presenting with us today, but they're very much involved in this work. The interim director of research, Dr. Melissa Tiganji, is our co-PI at the Illinois State Board of Education. Just want to acknowledge our funders, everybody's funder today, and with our gratitude for their support for this work. If you can go ahead. Thanks, New. So this, I want to talk a little bit about where we're going with this study. This is a study of the Illinois State Board of Education's learning renewal work that's focused on social and emotional learning. I'll talk about the components of the learning renewal SEL in a minute, but through this work, we're really deepening a partnership that has existed for many years between the American Institutes for Research and the Illinois State Board of Education. We have a lot of work that we were doing together, and this really deepens that partnership. We're all about AIR's mission is to generate and use evidence that contributes to a better, more equitable world. And this project is all about generating evidence for promising programs to support kids in their pandemic recovery. But beyond sort of feeding the field in terms of information, we also are trying to support practice and support best practice by feeding information back to the regional offices and districts and schools that are participating in our work. We're using a mixed methods approach in our evaluation to try to minimize burden on folks. So we're collecting some primary information, but relying on a lot of secondary information as well. And as with everybody these days, have a lot of focus on maintaining the privacy and confidentiality of the folks who share information with us. So let me talk a little bit about what learning renewal, social and emotional learning, or SEL, looks like in Illinois. Illinois is an exciting place because in response to the pandemic, not only have they invested in a lot of the usual academic interventions, tutoring, all of that, but they set aside a significant component of their federal recovery funds to focus on social emotional learning interventions. Not only because they thought it was important to do, but they thought it was important to do this first. And so there are three components of the learning renewal effort in Illinois. One is the funding of social and emotional learning hubs. Illinois is one of the states that has regional clusters of schools and districts. And in each of these 6 major regions throughout the state, plus Chicago Public Schools, its own SEL hub area, there's an influx of funding through this work to support training and TA regarding social emotional learning. Moving to the center box, there is an intervention called Resilience Education to Advance Community Healing, or REACH, which is an intervention to support trauma responsive approaches in schools. It supports schools doing a needs assessment focused on trauma, the trauma responsive schools needs implementation assessment, and action planning, and supports schools through communities of practice as they implement their action plans. And then there's a significant funding for these 2-year community partnership grants, which link schools and districts with community-based mental health and other student support organizations. So some after school organizations, some mental health, some recreation focused, but the idea is to support students' mental health through those efforts. So those are the 3 components that broadly that we're evaluating. Our work, as I mentioned, mixed method study, there's a strong implementation focus to understand how well the pieces are being implemented. Will a lot of qualitative components there. Looking to the right, there's a cost analysis. We'll be looking at resource cost allocation models. And then in the center, it outlines sort of the components of our outcome study, where we'll be looking at student effects as well as effects on teachers and schools. We'll be looking at differential effects and mediation. And then throughout all of this, we will have a focus on dissemination. So let's skip ahead. I think in terms of most of the student outcomes that we're interested in are available through the school report cards. So but it also includes the 5 essentials, school, it's more than school climate, but information about conditions for learning in schools that we'll be looking at. And importantly, and I think this is one of the important contributions of this study, is we're measuring student social emotional competence as well as teachers social emotional wellness and well-being as part of this study, and looking at those as well. So you can go ahead. We just started this year, so we don't have results to share yet. We are completing data collection for this spring, and we'll be doing analysis and reporting going forward. And if you skip ahead, I think that's it. So we have, with questions, you can reach us at this email address, and I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for this study? Okay, let's move right along to North Carolina. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Fuller from the Education Policy Initiative at Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill. I'm presenting today on behalf of a larger team of my colleagues at UNC, as well as partners at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, particularly in the Office of Learning Recovery and Acceleration. So our project is like all of these projects, focused on thinking about how do we get students back, engaged in school, recovering academically, doing well with their school experience following the COVID-19 pandemic. We specifically are focusing on the impacts of school extension programs that are being sponsored by the Office of Learning, Recovery, and Acceleration using some of the state reserve from the ESSER funding within North Carolina. Specifically, so far, we've been focusing on summer programming, although that's expanding a little bit as new programs are being implemented. Our approach here is this is a mixed methods study. We're using surveys. This is an SLDS grant from IES. So we're heavily using our state longitudinal data system. We're also using surveys of districts, students, staff, as well as some qualitative analysis to help us really understand what's going on in schools and districts. So our primary research questions are, first of all, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected student learning, engagement, and progress through school? So this is just sort of tracking statewide, how are students doing, overall within certain subgroups, grades, areas, and looking broadly across the range of student outcomes. We're also looking at how are these programs, these school extension programs, being implemented in different districts and charter schools across the state. And then finally, what are the impacts of the school extension programs on the student outcomes we care about? And that will include, we hope, digging into what are kind of the active ingredients that lead to bigger impacts on students. So we've looked at many student outcomes, but just a flavor of this. I'm focusing less on test scores because while they're very interesting, we know a lot of people are tracking test scores. So looking at some different outcomes here. This is looking at chronic absences compared to pre-pandemic. And what we see here is that they were up in 2020-21, where many students were remote or hybrid, but they've continued going up into 21-22. We don't have data yet on the current school year, but anecdotally, we hear that absences are still problematic. And then this is also the percent of students who failed, middle and high school students who failed any course, or at least one class, which was way up during the remote hybrid year, but has remained somewhat higher during the school year following that, where all students were back in school in person. And so while we're tracking a broader range of outcomes, just kind of a flavor of like there's a clear need here to get students kind of back on track, engaged in school, passing their courses. So we're looking at a set of programs. So in summer 2021 in North Carolina, we had a legislatively mandated summer program for all districts. Charter schools could opt in, but districts were required to offer this at all grade levels with a minimum of 30 days of programming, or there's an hour requirement that matches that. So some did longer days and fewer longer days, some did more shorter days. But it included academic instruction, which was intended to be targeted as learning acceleration versus more remediation focused, as well as enrichment activities and socio-emotional supports. Then in summer 2022, and then this coming summer, we have a different set of programs which are voluntary, but districts do receive some funding to support those programs. So there is an incentive for them to participate, and many have. There's more flexibility here in design, and the length of the program varies quite a bit more compared to summer 2021. There are two main programs here. One is Summer Bridge, which is focused more on the transition grades. So transition either into school, between elementary and middle, into high school, although there is enough flexibility that districts can all focus exactly the same way. So I'm sort of getting you broadly characterizing different folks say different things. And then Career Accelerator, which is focused more on middle and high school students, with providing them some connection to career opportunities, different kinds of work environments, and in many cases, some actual credentials that they could complete over the summer and have to take forward with them, which is a little bit different. Summer 2021, a lot of the high school focused around credit recovery, and so this is a little bit different. And then in the coming school year, 23-24, schools will also have an opportunity to offer math extension programs focused on middle grade math. And again, there's flexibility here for different PSUs to do different designs. So keeping track of that is one of our activities that we're working on. So in terms of implementation, what we've been seeing so far from summer 2021 is that these programs were intended to target at-risk students, and it seems like districts were pretty successful at actually targeting those students and getting them to enroll. Program attendees were more likely to have been chronically absent, below proficiency on state tests, or to have failed classes in the prior school year compared to other students who did not participate in the programs. They also differed in their approaches, particularly to socio-emotional learning. Some offered a core like curriculums in socio-emotional learning. Some offered small groups, all kinds of different approaches. We also saw different approaches to enrichment, different kinds of activities offered, and then some differences in whether they were targeting their academic instruction more towards acceleration, as they were encouraged to do so, or more of kind of a remediation focus. And so then drawing heavily on our qualitative work to really understand what's going on in the districts, there's some key program implementation challenges that we feel like are really important to contextualize that both the choices that districts are making, as well as potentially some limitations around impacts. So staffing programs has been difficult, both between sort of overall staffing challenges, but as well as, teachers may be feeling burned out, not as willing to participate in summer courses. Also, staffing with teaching assistants and counselors has been challenging. Student recruitment, engagement, and attendance has been challenging when we look at, of students who attended the program, so they attend at least 75% of the days. We only get about half who attended in summer 21, half, at least 75% of the days offered. For districts, having the opportunity to use funds to support transportation has been really key to actually getting that student engagement attendance. For charter schools who don't necessarily have some of the same transportation infrastructure, that has been a real barrier to being able to implement these programs. Also, in staffing challenges, there's been a lot of administrative churn in our districts as well as charter schools, which has made it hard to maintain some continuity in summer programs, kind of lessons learned between years, and also presents a research challenge in learning what they did in prior years. So our ongoing work, we're going to continue to be tracking our trends of student outcomes statewide. We're also hoping to describe in more detail the characteristics of these summer 22 and 23 programs and participants, and as well as we're working on using quasi-experimental designs to estimate impacts of the summer learning programs on those student outcomes, with the goal of ultimately hoping to identify some promising practices around school extension and student recovery. And please feel free to reach out with any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions, clarifying questions right now for the North Carolina team? Okay. Well, let me then turn it over to last but not least, the newest team to join the network at Georgia State University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Sass from Georgia State, and I'm here representing the Metro Atlanta Policy Lab for Education. Next slide. We're a research practice partnership in the Atlanta metro area, which is part of a larger policy lab called Georgia Policy Labs. We've been working with 5 school districts in the metro area for nearly 6 years now. Collectively, they educate about 30% of public school students in Georgia. Our work related to COVID is focused on 3 of our partners that collectively educate about 250,000 students, and had formative assessment data both before, during, and currently related to student achievement. Next slide. So prior to receiving funding from IES, we've produced 3 reports related to the pandemic and recovery efforts. One looked at differences in achievement growth by learning mode choice. And a couple of key takeaways there. One is that students, when they were studying online, were spending a lot less time than when they were learning in person, about half as much time online as they would have in-person brick and mortar classrooms. And correspondingly, students' weekly achievement growth was lower while they were in remote instruction. A second paper looks at a summer school program offered by one of our partners in 2021. And one of the big takeaways there was that participation was really low. Amongst those students that were specifically invited to attend a summer school, only about 18% actually participated. And using a regression discontinuity approach, we found no significant impacts on student achievement growth. Finally, we've done some descriptive analysis looking at teacher labor markets. And essentially what we found was that early on in the pandemic, between spring of 2020 and the fall of 2021, retention actually improved because the overall labor market, there was a lot of uncertainty, high unemployment. Teachers basically kept their jobs. Subsequent to that, we have seen some reduction in retention, but basically districts, at least in the Atlanta area, are pretty much back to pre-pandemic trends in terms of their ability to retain teachers. Next slide. So looking forward in the work we're going to do that's funded by IES, the work essentially falls into two big buckets. One is looking backward at the experiences of teachers and students during the pandemic and remote learning to try and understand how remote learning affected student achievement growth and how that varied across different students and what factors affected students' ability to learn in remote environments. And then also we have detailed information about teachers' assignments during remote learning, whether they were instructing students in person or remotely or a mix. And we hope to learn what factors and characteristics of teachers lead to greater productivity in remote instruction. The other bucket is focused on recovery efforts, looking at factors like participation, implementation, outcomes, and how those outcomes vary across student groups. Next slide. So in terms of the lessons learned analysis, we've been producing reports for our district partners throughout the pandemic. We're currently working on an update through winter of the current school year, where we track progress of fixed cohorts of students over time and see how their progress is changing over time. We also have some projects where we're going to look at the heterogeneous effects of the pandemic on student learning. In particular, in one of our districts, we found significant differences by gender, and we're going to look at a couple of hypotheses to try and explain that. One is differences in the peer interactions in a remote learning environment, and the other is looking at information about students' ability of self-control and how that might affect success in remote learning. We're also doing some work at looking at the impacts of the pandemic and remote learning on English learners. And one of our district partners is a major refugee resettlement area. So we have individual level data that distinguishes whether a student is a refugee or a non-refugee immigrant. And we want to look at the experiences of each and see how they may differ in terms of impacts of remote learning and subsequent recovery. Next slide. The other studies looking at the pandemic era and remote learning, as I said, we're going to look at teacher characteristics and effectiveness in remote instruction. And we also have two other studies that are going to rely on parent surveys that we're testing at the moment and hope to be rolling out soon. One trying to look at the effects of economic stress and housing insecurity. So from the parent surveys, we'll have information that we can link to student records about the home situation, parental unemployment, et cetera. And then also we have records on eviction filings that have been scraped from the web and provided by local courts. And so we can look at students that were facing housing insecurity during the pandemic and how that might have affected their success in remote learning. And then also we're going to be looking at how the experience while remote learning affected subsequent behavior as students returned to in-person instruction. Next slide. And the remaining 8 studies are all looking forward at the effects of recovery strategies. And here in Georgia, very much a local control state. So the state of Georgia Department of Education basically doled out the federal dollars to districts, and it's really districts been driving the recovery strategy. So we have a lot of variation amongst the partners we're working with. This includes in-school programs. One district for a period of time basically dropped teaching social studies and science and focused on math and reading for a period of time. We're going to look at the effects of that. Also, another district set up intervention periods where they reorganized the school schedule to have a period of time for interventions, but precisely how that time was used varied across schools. We have a principal survey we're rolling out to look at variation in the use of that time and its impact on students. We also have multiple districts that engaged in in-school tutoring, and we'll look at those effects. Next slide. And then there are a variety of out-of-school programs happening in the metro area, including voluntary virtual tutoring program, various extended learning programs, after-school programs, and Saturday school, and then, of course, summer learning programs. Next slide. And then finally, we also have some districts that initiated the use of online instructional materials, in particular iReady, and we want to see what impact that had on student achievement growth. And then finally, we do intend to look at some longer run outcomes. So look at impacts on high school graduation, dropout, and college attendance to see what sort of the lasting effects of the pandemic have been. And that's it. And you can, next slide, see us on the web or via Twitter, and look forward to connecting with some of you.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any clarifying questions for this Atlanta team? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to go into sort of a panel discussion where I have some questions to ask the panel, and then we will have go into audience Q&A. So just if you joined us late, just to remind you, these are 5 research projects funded by IES that are part of a network called the Restart Network. I am putting in the chat what it stands for, basically looking at pandemic learning recovery from PreK-12. We do have another network looking at community college recovery, and another one looking at like digital learning platforms during COVID. So this network, these 5 projects are looking at 3 states, California, Illinois, and North Carolina. I just realized that's West Coast, Midwest, and East Coast, and we didn't plan it that way. And then also 2 large districts, Chicago and Atlanta. So that's sort of the overview. And we've just heard from each of the projects, which started in the last year, about what they're planning to do over the next 3 years as part of the network. And they'll be working together too. They'll be sharing lessons learned. They'll be working together on figuring out solutions to issues that they're coming up with, and then also doing some dissemination together. So that is part of the purpose of the network. And there is earlier in the chat, there's a link to the website. Anyway, to get started into the panel discussion, I want to throw out the first question, which is, what are you really excited about in your project? Do you have a new method or data collection tool, or anything exciting about your project that you want to share that didn't come out in your presentation? Come on, folks, we talked about just jumping in.
I'll start. I did mention it briefly, but I think that one of the really cool things that's happening in Illinois is this new measurement of teachers and school staffs social emotional well-being, so really emotional intelligence, as well as a well-being index that's composed of measures of their sort of anxiety and depression and burnout. So we're getting the things that schools and districts really care about in terms of staff well-being are finally being measured. So I think that that's huge, and I think it will support exactly the kinds of interventions that are really needed, and allow folks to monitor it over time. So I'm super excited about that. So that's one thing.
Great, thanks for sharing. Anyone else want to talk about something exciting about their project?
Great, and I'll just add from a public school partners perspective, this is just an incredible opportunity, I think, for Chicago Public Schools to study impact with our partners at the consortium. This really is like the result of many years of effort to align high quality comprehensive curriculum plus curriculum-based professional learning, plus we've adopted new common K2 assessments. So it's like all the stars are aligning to really have the pieces in place, and now to have this opportunity to study impact is just really exciting.
That's great, and that's a good segue into the next panel question. What's been working really great in your partnership project so far, and why do you think that is?
Okay, so I'm going to build on Jane then. I'm just going to jump in and say, we meet every other week with Jane, so in the literacy department, but also folks from the department that's implementing Skyline, and also the research office at CPS. And so it's really nice to have kind of everyone from the different offices come together to provide different perspectives. That's been great. And I have to say also from our perspective, we've done a lot of our research is focused on high school and grades 3 through 8. And it has felt like we've almost ignored, the kindergarten through second grade space to some, they're much less studied. And so for us, it's a great opportunity for us to learn more about the early grades and improve our research in that area.
Corinne, this is Jonathan. I'll just chime in, I think, and I'm giving all credit here to New and her colleagues at PPIC, in that what's working really well is, even though we have multiple organizations in California involved in the project as the PI, co-PI, she's really done a great job of kind of organizing us, meeting regularly with the smaller kind of focused research team, always have an agenda in advance, and then also the larger team gets together periodically as well. So again, very focused agenda. We never waste a single minute. In fact, we usually go over the time because we keep going, into detail. But so I think just organizationally, being able to do that, and then also being able to connect with the Restart folks and kind of figure out what the other teams are doing across the country has been very informative. So I think there's a lot of cross-pollination. So not only within California, some great kind of organizational and logistics, but then also being able to kind of cross-pollinate across the other projects has been really, really informative from my perspective.
I'm going to jump in on the North Carolina side and say, I think, interestingly, one of the positive outcomes from the pandemic in North Carolina has been, we've long partnered between the university and the state agency to do research, but working sort of side by side, more on a more continuous basis versus just sort of at the start of a project and then at the end of a project has been really good. And also, a real strong effort by the folks in the Office of Learning Recovery to make sure that the information we're producing isn't just going to the state level, but it's also going out to the district level where really a lot of decision making actually happens. And it's kind of funny because in some ways I actually think the transition to being used to video meetings has enabled kind of that deep ongoing collaboration in a way that just didn't happen as much before the pandemic.
Yeah, I would just echo that for us here in Atlanta, having a long-standing established partnership with districts has been essential. I mean, I can't imagine starting this work from scratch. And we've had multiple superintendent transitions, et cetera, but having those relationships with the districts, getting ready access to data, working with them to develop surveys, we couldn't have done that if we didn't have that trust built up over a long-standing relationship.
Yes, that's great. I think Kim also mentioned that with the Illinois team. So the next question, have you experienced any challenges or do you anticipate any? And if so, how are you handling them?
I can get started sharing some of our experiences. So one of the challenges we faced is the rapidly changing policy landscape. So Jonathan alluded to this during the presentation. When we wrote the grant proposal, the ELO-G was the largest, the $4.6 billion was the largest state learning recovery program. But then after we submitted the proposal in a few months, the state enacted another couple of large recovery programs. And after we got the IES grant, the state actually included another $7.9 billion learning emergency recovery grant and another nearly $4 billion arts, music, education, and instructional materials block grant. So because of all of this, we really had to and also we, by doing some qualitative study, we learned that districts are actually braiding some of the funding sources. So for example, they're using ESSER 1 to fund year 1 of the tutoring program, and then they're using ELO-G to fund the second year, and then using the learning recovery to fund the future year after 2024. So because they're braiding the funding sources, we really had to expand the scope, and by focusing really about what kind of recovery programs have been implemented and being a little bit more agnostic about the funding sources.
And I can jump in and say, one challenge that we're having is around recruitment and our data collection. And so, we have our social emotional learning survey for both students and teachers out, but, there's multiple surveys out right now across the state. So it's a challenge. And we know that teachers, staff, schools, it's a challenging year. So asking them for extra to participate in our interviews and our surveys, it's a lot. And we're really trying to balance that, even with our social emotional learning coaches, that they have a lot on their plate right now. So getting their attention and asking them to participate. And so we're constantly as a team trying to figure out how can we minimize that burden. And also how can we ensure that we have representation and balance, because we know some of our rural schools really are struggling and getting that participation.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the big challenges are programs that were implemented at the school level. So like summer programs were district-wide. It's pretty easy to find out what the criteria for participation was, attendance records, et cetera. But a lot of programs were really left up to the discretion of individual schools, which is great for variation, but record keeping is often lacking. And as I mentioned, we're running some principal surveys this summer to try and dig in more details. But that's a big challenge when you have variation across schools and not a central repository for information about implementation.
Okay, actually, one of the questions that came in from the audience in the Q&A box is also one of the questions I had for the panel. So I'll start with that one. How are you disseminating your results? How are you sharing the information from the research and partnerships back with the districts and other interested groups? And also, what have been their reactions thus far? That's my additional piece.
Fran, I can just share that in Chicago, Elaine could speak better to any outside distribution. We haven't shared sort of beyond CPS any of our findings yet, but we are starting to engage in quarterly what we're calling knowledge sharing sessions. So meeting with the research team, particularly around the qualitative elements for our team and literacy to learn what the consortium team is finding, so that we can start to use that information in real-time planning around our professional learning plan for next year, so that we're not waiting, long periods of time before getting some iterative feedback.
Right. So at our meetings every other week, we share whatever quantitative analyses we've been doing as those are ongoing. And then the qualitative has, the classroom observations interviews have been going on this winter and spring. And so then those will, those findings will be shared. And then our plan, we do, so the way we operate, we are, we believe all of our work should be involving the different stakeholders in Chicago. So we have a steering committee that has members from the Teachers Union and Principals Association and ISB, State Board of Education, and nonprofits working in schools. So as we come out with our findings, we will be engaging these different groups so that we can get their input and make sure that we're answering questions that they have and considering different framing. With some of our other work that we have going on right now, we're working directly with both the school district and the teachers union to support professional learning around the use of Cultivate survey, which is about getting information about student experience. And so, the more I feel like the more that we can bring in different stakeholders to work together, the more that's, there can be progress overall in the district.
Yeah, in Atlanta, our partnership, one of our foundational principles is that all results from our work become public. So we share preliminary findings with our partners. They can clarify things, but ultimately we have editorial control and make everything public on our website. Typically, we interact with local media, radio, and print media to get the results out. And obviously, we have in-depth discussions with our partners, including at the superintendent level, to really inform them about what we're finding and what it means for their district. So we get the word out in all sorts of different ways.
I would say in North Carolina, I think that's something that our partners at NCDPI have really been pushing on, and ways that have been really helpful is utilizing sort of existing gatherings of folks from districts, for example, like State Superintendent Association, as well as creating new opportunities for district level folks to come together, either virtually or in person this summer. Chief academic officers will all come to Raleigh and get together, and then sharing the research findings in those times, so that it's not, certainly we produce written materials which are then sent out to people, but also just that opportunity to actually be in a room speaking with people and for them to hear about the research findings and be able to ask questions.
So I know not all of the studies have findings yet, so that was maybe a little premature, but some of you do, and you're having some ongoing discussions with your partners and other stakeholders, so that's great. I think we're going to move into an open question and answer time right now. There is a question that is in the question and answer box. I don't know if you can see it, and I don't know if any of you have looked at it and want to try taking on one or both of those questions. While you're looking at that, I will also ask other audience members, because there's so many people here, if you could use the Q&A box or the chat to ask your question. It'll be easier to see when your question comes up. So please go ahead and type a question into the Q&A or chat, and we will try to get those in order that they come in. So panel, does anyone want to take a stab at answering the questions from Nicole Terlinder, who is from California?
I can get started. So I can just talk about two of the challenges we've seen so far about implementing some of the federal and also state stimulus dollars. So the first one is staffing challenge, and this applies to both certified and also classified staff. So for example, right now we're working with 6 case study districts, and all of them are having very severe staffing challenges. So a lot of times, for example, when they're trying to implement extending learning time, and it's really challenging to find staff to actually staff those programs. So sometimes they have to contract it out to a CBO to get this done. And sometimes they have to really negotiate really hard with the labor groups. So the staffing challenge is definitely one of the emerging themes we're seeing so far. And then the second part is I think maybe it's more unique to California. On top of the federal ESSER money, California also invested more than 20 billion one-time learning recovery fund in the last few years. And so there has been some confusion among districts about, what the money can and cannot be used. And so, for example, one of the things we're seeing is some districts think, the arts, music, and instructional block grant, even though it has arts and music education in it, but the funding is actually really flexible. Districts can use the funding on variety of things, such as pension. So, but the understanding of how those dollars can be spent is not uniform across districts. And we've started to see a lot of districts are interpreting or understanding this very differently. And that has led to some of the challenges in terms of how to spend down those money in a really effective way. So those are the two things we've seen so far.
I would echo what you said about staffing. Certainly, specially trained folks like school psychologists are really hard to get, and your best intentions may not accomplish anything if there's just nobody to do a good job. But even at the level of like bus drivers, if you don't have bus drivers to provide transportation, it's very difficult to get students to, for example, come into schools for a summer program. The other thing I would say is just getting, a lot of the promising strategies involve more time for students to be engaged and learning. And it's challenging to get students to attend voluntary programs that are out of school hours for all kinds of reasons. Families and students are juggling a lot. A lot of times the timing can be difficult with regard to parents' work schedules. For older students, they may also have work obligations, childcare obligations in the summer, and so it's a real challenge.
Yeah, I would echo Sarah's comments that voluntary recovery programs are not like the Field of Dreams. You can build it, but they may not come. I mentioned the summer school study we did with 18% take up. We're in the midst of an analysis of voluntary online tutoring, very low take up there. Carly Robinson and Susanna Loeb have a working paper based on data from a charter network in California or a virtual tutoring program at very low take up as well. I think it's going to be really challenging for voluntary programs outside of school hours, and schools are going to really need to think hard about trying to reallocate time during the school day, which is not easy to see significant gains.
So another question that came in is thanking you for your presentations and asking how the Chicago Public Schools and Illinois recovery efforts fit together. And more broadly, how do the state efforts fit with locally developed recovery interventions and vice versa?
I guess I can start, and then maybe someone from the Illinois team wants to go. I have to say I was very excited when I learned that Illinois was got another one of these grants and would be in the network with us. Because I do think there's a lot of opportunity for us to learn from each other. I will say one of the challenges I think we have with our study is that there are lots of different, pandemic recovery efforts going on. So around social emotional learning, there are other efforts going on in the district too. And so as researchers, that actually will be a challenge for us is to really disentangle some of that. But it also is exciting because any one effort, like literacy instruction, fits within, you know, a larger sphere of policies and changes that are happening in the district, which, you know, as a longstanding research practice partnership, we're interested in how all the pieces fit together. And so, and we're doing research in other areas, you know, too. And so I am excited about, you know, learning from the Illinois team and really thinking about how that initiative fits with these other initiatives. I will say the fact that this, you know, this is focused on K2 literacy is a little, also is, you know, has some benefits too, in that a lot of efforts that are happening are also happening at older grade levels too. And so that makes for a little difference too.
Yeah. And thank you, Elaine. I share your excitement at being in the network together, and would just point out that there is a network coordinating team on top of all of our individual research projects that started pulling this together. But the one thing that in response to the question, I would just say is that none of the efforts that Illinois has put forward are extraordinarily prescriptive. They really are constructed to allow a lot of room for local choice. And that, of course, creates a lot of variation in implementation, which creates a lot of work for us to understand implementation. But even the most program-like thing that's part of what we're evaluating is the REACH initiative. And there's a lot of room in terms it involves doing a needs assessment, developing an action plan, carrying out the action plan. There's a lot of room for local choice and incorporation of local preferences and priorities in actually carrying that out. So yay, there's a lot of room for local adaptation, but it does make it hard to sort of wrap your hands around it from a statewide research perspective.
I'll add, you know, even with the K2 literacy, you know, the way Chicago operates is there's a lot of local choice at the school level too, which I actually think is a strength in a lot of ways. It does, you know, there are challenges there, but it also, you know, allows for more buy-in, ownership, you know, adaptation to local conditions. You know, and then, you know, it allows us to really study and understand how differences in how that implementation occurs actually are related to the outcomes that we're studying.
Sorry, I was muted. Does anyone else want to talk about how the state and local efforts are fitting together? Okay, well, I don't see any other questions that have come in, but I wondered if any of you have questions for each other. Or any advice for the audience and if anyone wants to set up a partnership to start studying some of these pandemic recovery efforts. Okay, well, we're almost at time, so I will let you off the hook. If others have questions for any of the teams, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions. We did put the link to the network website in there, and then you can also contact any one of us via email. I want to thank New Gao for putting together this presentation, this session. She did all of the heavy lifting and I was just here to guide us through, but I thank you so much, and thank you to all of our presenters and to all of you in the audience. Thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing your findings over the next few years. Stay tuned, everyone.